So after progressing steadily in a variety of leadership roles at the local, regional, and state levels, Erin Aleman was appointed unanimously by the board of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency of Planning, Cmap, in June of 2019 as the agency's third executive director. Erin brings more than a decade of accomplishments in developing transportation and land use policies as the agency implements its On to 2050, the region's new long-term comprehensive plan to help the 7 counties and 284 municipalities in northeastern Illinois improve the quality of life through the areas of transportation, housing, economic development, open space, the environment, and many more. Prior to joining Cmap, Erin served as the Vice President of Metro Strategies, a policy and advocacy consulting firm. From 2015 to 2018, she had held leadership positions at the Illinois Department of Transportation, IDOT, first as a bureau chief, and then as the director of the Office of Planning and Programming. During her IDOT tenure, she provided strategic guidance, implemented performance-based tools, and developed the Illinois State Freight Plan and other multimodal policy initiatives. Erin came full circle by rejoining Cmap, where she began her remarkable ascent fresh out of graduate school in 2007 as the agency's Philip D. Peters Regional Planning Fellow. Over the 8 years, she rose to the ranks to become principal planner in 2011. In that first stint at Cmap, Erin helped to create the highly successful Local Technical Assistance Program and led regional outreach for their Go to 2040, the agency's first long-term comprehensive plan. In addition to being the first woman to serve as Cmap's executive director, she is also the first professional planner to lead the agency. So please help me to welcome Erin Aleman.
I've got some notes, so I'm going to use the podium up here, although this feels incredibly formal. Thank you so much for the lovely welcome, and I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. I'm sure every speaker who gets up here and speaks mentions what a gem this building is, and just the importance of preservation and just the beautiful sites that we have all across our region that we want to make sure that we're taking care of here. So thank you, Heidi, and thank you, Laura. So being in his hometown, I would be remiss if I didn't mention and acknowledge the late Larry Christmas. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to meet and or work with him, former village president. He was the executive director of one of our predecessor agencies to Cmap, the Northeastern Illinois Planning Commission. And I had the honor of working with Larry closely on the Peters Fellowship Committee and met with him. He interviewed me when I was applying for that fellowship position, learned a lot from him, and just his passion for community, for bringing people together, and collaboration was just so important and impactful on my career, and also I think on the career of many planners from across our region. So just had to, mention Larry and just how near and dear he was to my heart and our planning profession here in Northeastern Illinois. I think, again, Larry would love to be here today in a room full of like-minded people who care about community and are passionate about the health and well-being of communities, and who are passionate about design and preservation as well. So this evening, I really want to spend some time talking to you about how well-planned communities that are walkable can improve the well-being of our residents and region. And you heard from my bio, I'm coming at this maybe from a little bit different perspective, but I feel a little bit more in place knowing that your next lecture is also very unique and interesting in terms of how you think about well-being in communities here. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or Cmap, as we call ourselves. And our agency and lots of agencies like us use lots of acronyms. So I apologize, I'm going to try and, my comms team has trained me well to not only use acronyms here. But our job as planners is really to make sure that we are thinking about an accessible and an equitable transportation system, that we're thinking about our regional economy and how it can work better for everyone, and really thinking about how we can bring to the forefront a number of the communities across our region that have been disproportionately affected by bad decisions from planners and transportation officials. And I acknowledge that there are a lot of ways of addressing community place, and oftentimes when I talk to my staff, I talk to them about we can solve this problem with the data that we have on a map, but we actually don't live in the community. We don't understand the needs that communities have, and it's really important to bring that perspective to bear when you are thinking about community planning. So I work with a really great team. We have about 105 staff at Cmap who are committed to the 8.5 million people that live here in our Chicago region. So I think I also can't emphasize enough how important equity and the built environment are to a healthier region here. And I think many of us would agree that the last 2 years have really hammered that point home for us. A growing body of research shows that it's really important to think about those social determinants of health, how the conditions in which we live, the conditions in which we're born into, where we work, really affects a range of health outcomes. And that includes our neighborhood environment as well. So from the houses we live in to our transportation options to access to parks and open space across our region. And I think it's always interesting when we look at the data and information about how we can assess these issues as well. So our zip codes can have a bigger effect on our health outcomes than our DNA. Research has shown that our region is home to the biggest life expectancy gap in the country. So residents who live in Chicago's Streeterville neighborhood live 90 years on average, whereas residents who live in Inglewood live an average of just 60 years. It's a 30-year difference between neighborhoods that are less than 10 miles apart. And to me, that's pretty unacceptable in the third largest region in the country here. But it's more than just how long we live. It's really about the quality of our life. And I'm sure if I asked each and every one of you what quality of life means to you, it might mean something a little bit different, right? For me, I've got 2 kids. I want a place that's walkable. I want to be able to get things. I want a park that they can play at. But again, when we think about the quality of life, I think a lot of the indicators that we track at Cmap tell the same story. And it's an unfortunate one, that people of color, that people with low income, and other vulnerable groups experience deep disparities and those key quality of life issues. We see these disparities in what might seem to be the most basic of things, like access to nature and fresh air. In some parts of our region, only 25% of residents live near parks and open space, while in more affluent areas, 50% have access to these places. So even just our ability to get outside is impacted by our built environment. And when we think about commute times across our region, people of color in our region are twice as likely as white residents to say that it's hard for them to get to work. We did a public opinion survey in 2021, and we looked across race and gender and age, and our public opinion survey also showed that Black residents in our region face the longest travel times for a range of trips, but especially work trips. I think too, as you think about how our transportation impacts our quality of life, it's really about having access to your necessities. Oftentimes when you hear from transportation engineers, and I love them and worked with many of them throughout my career, and they are excellent at solving problems. But I think when you think about how our communities are built and what our transportation system does is that it provides access to opportunity. It's not just transportation for road building of itself, not just to build that bridge. It's about the connections that our transportation system makes to whether it's getting to friends and family, whether it's easy for you to get to a grocery store. And two, we're seeing disparities in terms of low-income households. Almost 90% of residents in low-income and high-need households 90% of residents who live in low-need areas, so the high-income households, say that it's easy for them to get to grocery stores, compared to about 65% of residents who live in areas that are very high need and have limited public resources. Our data shows that many of these disparities are pretty stubborn, but they aren't set in stone. I believe that we can make improvements, in part through smarter, more equitable planning. We really want to make sure that every resident across our region has the opportunity and access to things like clean air, to affordable housing, to walkable sidewalks, and other benefits. And we can move the needle on some of these societal health disparities and create that more inclusive and thriving region. And I think Cmap is well positioned to be able to help support these items. Many of these issues are the things that we work on every day at Cmap. With our regional partners, we are implementing our 2050 plan, and we have been thinking about how our communities can better address transportation equity, how they can build in environmental sustainability and other quality of life issues in the process. You know, our roadmap, the 2050 plan, really will help us create these healthier communities and address these various disparities, but we need to do it collaboratively. So a stronger transportation network is really fundamental, not just for our prosperity, but for our public health. Our public transportation system is a route to opportunity for many people across our region. Affordable and accessible transportation connects all residents, regardless of their socioeconomic status, race, or ability. It connects us to jobs, to healthcare, to other destinations that are critical to our success. And we've heard that residents value the region because of its transit system. 71% of residents believe that investing in public transit is the most effective way to address congestion, according to our public opinion survey. But there are also direct health benefits. So research shows that if you look at public transit and you use public transit, it's associated with an additional 8 to 33 minutes of walking per day for individuals. I'm glad to get back on transit so they can see that extra walk. I know that everybody's, been putting on the stretch pants recently, so I'm excited to put those away. Not to mention fewer traffic crashes and reduced air pollution are some other benefits from using transit. So, residents of all incomes rely on transit in our region because it's just so fundamental to the way that our system has been built, but transit access is especially crucial for residents with low income who tend to own fewer cars because of the high cost of driving. These households are more likely to use transit trips that are required trips to live their daily lives as opposed to just commuting into an office and back. So I'm sure you all will agree that one of Oak Park's many assets is the abundant public transit options. You've got the Green Line, you've got the Blue Line, you've got Metro, you've got multiple bus stops. They all help make Oak Park a valuable, healthy, vibrant, accessible community. And today's a beautiful day to be outside when we were driving through. It's great to see people outside and feel like it's spring. And I think too, the demand for walking and biking has just increased over COVID. But it also was increasing prior to the pandemic as well. I think it's just been accelerated. Many people who participated in our public opinion survey also said that they expect to walk, run, hike, or bike more than they did during COVID restrictions. So we really have an opportunity here to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, give residents more active transportation options, and not just in communities like Oak Park, but in every corner of our region we're hearing this. And this will mean healthier outcomes for individuals and a more sustainable future for our region. Residents really do value that compact walkability of communities. So the UNTI 2050 plan recommends supporting the development of these compact walkable communities, and these are communities that support transit, that encourage exercise and physical health, that improve vibrancy, provide air quality and environmental benefits, and broadly promote high quality of life. You may have heard in the news there was some interest around these 15-minute cities, this idea that residents should be able to walk or bike to all of their essential services within 15 minutes. It's something that we as planners get excited about. It doesn't work everywhere in every corner of our region, but it's something that it's a concept a vision that we could sort of point ourselves to and say, this is the types of places that we want to build when we invest our dollars that we have. Recent home buying trends and consumer preferences also indicate a growing desire for mixed-use communities with walkable amenities in both urban and suburban areas. We as a region also didn't have really good data on our sidewalks until recently. Our staff analyzed about 33,000 miles of roads in Cook, Will, DuPage, Lake, Kane, Kendall, and McHenry counties to really think about, where are there sidewalks and where are there opportunities to make sure that we're thinking and talking with our communities about investing in the walkability of our communities and thinking about, are there problems with safety? Are we thinking about the sidewalks and accessibility to transit as well? The resulting inventory that we developed shows that the availability, quality, and safety of sidewalks across the region really varies greatly. This database, though, is publicly available, so one of the things that we also have a lot of at Cmap is data, so we want to support our communities through having all of this data. So if you are a transportation nerd, or if you like myself, I'm not calling anybody else a nerd, that I certainly fall in that category, we want you to be able to have the tools to advocate for the changes that you need, whether you're on the municipal side, you're at the advocacy side, or you're just a member of the public curious about what needs to happen. So I think, too, it's not just about prioritizing sidewalk improvements just in and of themselves. It really is about providing accessibility. And I think we can be thinking, too, more broadly about people with disabilities and seniors as well. So as our region's population ages, it will become even more important to create walkable areas that help individuals maintain their independence when driving is no longer an option, support physical health and exercise, and allow seniors and actually even families with young kids who are pushing around that stroller be able to get to those parks and open space easier. Of course, sidewalks alone don't solve all of our health problems here. I think, too, Oak Park is a great example of having a strong, vibrant downtown Main Street. We've been working with a number of local partners, and we worked with Oak Park a few years ago to look at a revitalization plan for North Avenue and Austin Boulevard between Austin and Harlem. The plan really recommended a number of ways to improve the corridor's economic vitality and increase those connections between Oak Park and Chicago, and really enhance that equity, that quality of life for all residents. I'm sure these are things that you're all familiar with, but like adding public art, helping think about that experience that a person has while they're walking in their downtown communities, it really can encourage people to get outside, get out of their cars, and take a walk instead to the places that they need to go. Housing and zoning also play a role in creating more compact, walkable, and inclusive communities. So Oak Park, again, has been a leader in a number of these issues. Oak Park also permits accessible ADUs, accessory dwelling units, ADUs, also known as granny flats or coach houses here, but they're those separate housing units, and my team probably thinks that I'm crazy, but I keep talking about looking for a house where I can support both my mom and my mother-in-law living. Don't necessarily want them in my house, but an accessory dwelling unit would be a great place to have them so that they could see the kids whenever they walked outside. Those are really things that can promote this development that really enhances economic vitality, and the sidewalks and the walkability all bring these things together here. That multi-generational housing, I think, is something, too, that, over the course of the past couple of years, we've been thinking a lot more about as planners and as individuals as well, because we value the time with the people that we care about the most. So, I think COVID has presented some unexpected challenges, but also a number of opportunities. By the end of April 2020, transit ridership had declined by more than 80% across CTA, Metra, and PACE systems, and total ridership was still down about 64% from 2019 levels as early as January of this year. Metra still continues to experience the largest decline in ridership, primarily because their routes were built to bring people into the city, the downtown central business district. But I think, too, not everyone is able to work from home. In fact, 60% of the jobs across our region that are in industries like transportation and logistics, like manufacturing, and healthcare still need to be done in person. There's just no other option. Jobs like food services also need employees to be on site, and small retail businesses, Main Street businesses, need people to show up. They can't be done from home. But we estimate that the number of employees working remotely across the region is predicted to rise incredibly fast. Prior to the pandemic, we were estimating that just between 6 and 8% of people would work from home by 2030. We were wrong. Right now we're looking at upwards of 23, 25%, and in some parts of the region where there are lots of white-collar jobs, we anticipate that could be up to 35% on any given day. So transit is really going to be important, but we also have to sort of reframe how we think about our transit system. It's a public service for our essential workers. I think who disproportionately live in low-income communities. And so we need to think about how we get people to and from the jobs that can't be done from home, but also who are making wages that are less than the people who can work from home. Transit's also a really powerful tool to address congestion. If 25% of the trips that were taken pre-COVID shifted from transit to driving, we expect that our region would spend about 193,000 hours in additional traffic congestion, and about $1 billion in lost productivity across our region. So I don't want that, but you're probably also thinking to yourself, well, it's pretty congested now, right? So it could be worse, right? I'm not sort of a doomsday person, but I think it's really important that we think proactively about the importance. And it means also more pollution as cars sit idly, and as we think about sitting on traffic on the Eisenhower, it really isn't going to help our stress levels or improve air quality. So, I think, again, thinking about how we can create these dense, vibrant, walkable neighborhoods throughout the region, thinking about how we can help support the continuation of neighborhood streets and bikeability is just, the public is beginning to demand this in many parts of our region here. Our survey also showed that 63% of employed respondents would live elsewhere if they no longer had to commute. And I think this is really interesting because planners have often been talking about, well, how do we revitalize all these historic downtowns? And how should we be thinking about our main streets? But for the past couple decades, it's been really hard. Oak Park, I think, is perhaps an exception, but I know that you also have vacancies in your downtowns. But, I think COVID has shown us that if there is a downtown daytime population who's working from home 1-2 days a week, you're going to want to get out. You're going to want to go get coffee or get lunch. And having those places available is a new opportunity for communities to be thinking about in places that traditionally haven't had strong downtowns. So there's really an opportunity to create these vibrant places to live across the entire region so that you can have the choice to live in the place that makes you the happiest. When residents were asked about their ideal street to live in, the second most important factor after cost of living was having nearby shops and restaurants. So suburban communities can really think about their downtowns and revitalize them and providing those, like I mentioned, lunch spots, coffee shops, and other spaces. So at the same time, we've been thinking a lot about the $1.2 trillion, trillion with a T. I used to remind myself, I was like, was it a million or a billion? But now we're talking about trillions of dollars. In the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is really an opportunity, and I'm sure you've heard everybody say it's a once in a lifetime, it's a generational opportunity to do something different. Our state is expected to receive about $325 million more in funding for transit over the next 6 years. And some of the core programs that Cmap administers, so we manage a number of programs that help support communities rebuilding big infrastructure projects that help support air quality improvement. So Cmap will also see about a 76% increase for projects that improve options for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure across our region as well. So we manage funds that support the building, creation, implementation of those projects for our local communities. It's also going to help us make some innovative projects come to life around public space. So we will have about $700,000 annually over the next 6 years for Complete Streets initiatives as well. These projects can really help transform streets to serve people of all ages and abilities and travel modes, so not just cars. Again, all those things that I loved from COVID. I don't want to make any assumptions here, but getting outdoors, right? And biking and walking and outdoor dining. So I think, again, we have to think about equity as we implement these projects. COVID has also, really deepened existing inequities in our Black and brown communities. We need more equitable outcomes for our communities of color too. And the infrastructure bill also provides a lot of guidance and opportunity for our minority communities across the region here. So for example, the law includes about $1 billion for a pilot program to reconnect communities where highways have been created a barrier to mobility and economic development. So we at Cmap, my team, a little over 100 people that we have right now, are really preparing to help our communities build that pipeline of projects that's necessary. Our technical assistance program has assisted about 200 communities across our region since 2012. Often those communities have limited resources in developing these projects, from bicycle and pedestrian plans to zoning ordinances that advance the vision of our region. And today, because we're just steps away from the Green Line here at the Unity Temple, I just wanted to provide one other Green Line community project that we're working on. We have been working with the community, wrapping up a planning project to support equitable transit-oriented development around the Garfield Green Line station in Washington Park, which is really close to another gem of our region, the Garfield Park Conservatory. The type of development that we've been working on is just an approach to urban planning that really ensures people, regardless of their background or income, can experience the advantage of mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented development near these transit hubs. So, maybe you've heard the term TOD, transit-oriented development, really just means putting houses next to transit. But we've been talking about it as ETOD, equitable TOD initiatives. They help elevate the region's voices, the residents' voices locally, in making the decisions about what happens and around their transit stations, and making sure that we're protecting things like, that the housing is reasonable in terms of the cost, and that we aren't seeing those costs grow exponentially. And thinking about opportunities to bring in public health opportunities as well, and pairing that with our transit stations. And thinking also about environmental sustainability, making sure we're addressing flooding and all sorts of other issues on that project. So the Garfield Park team has worked with residents to prioritize a few recommendations in their planning process that fit the neighborhood needs. But we are excited about this project. We think it could serve as a model to be used elsewhere and really help communities leverage their transit assets as places where they can be accessible and places that they can get to good jobs across our region. So healthier, happier communities are also safer communities. We also have a group of safety experts, engineers, equity advocates that have been working on recommendations related to traffic safety across our region. When you think about sort of the complicated things that happen in downtowns that make them feel vibrant, they can also be really there can be dangerous intersections and crossings, and when you're thinking about schools, I know there are probably a number of examples from across our region where there have been misses or near misses when you're thinking about cars and people and bikes. But over the past couple of years, we've seen fatalities in our region increase, and that's certainly something that we don't want to have continue to happen. And so we've been trying to bring people together to develop some more innovative and tactical approaches to our traffic safety as well. Those include things like reducing speed limits where crash rates are high, and doing some educational outreach and engagement as well. Our public spaces also have to uphold the hallmarks of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Our latest travel survey showed that people with mobility, vision, or hearing impairments are significantly more likely to stay home on an average weekday than in other places across our region, which means that sometimes we'll talk to communities and they'll say, well, we don't have anybody who lives here with a disability. But perhaps that's a bias, an implicit bias that we have, because we haven't created the safe space for people to feel like they can get out of their homes and explore their communities. So again, without these better designed communities, residents who have disabilities do face challenges in getting to jobs, going to the doctor, and shopping for basic necessities. We know that about 178 municipalities in our region, so Cmap represents 7 counties, 284 municipalities. Of those 284 municipalities, about 178 don't have ADA transition plans. It's a federal requirement. And these plans are mandated to make communities easier to navigate, to help them develop a plan for how they're going to upgrade their infrastructure to meet these requirements. I am proud to point out that Oak Park is one of the 22 municipalities that's required to have these in our region that does have an ADA transition plan. So thank you to the leadership team here in the village for doing that. But we have a lot of work ahead of us to make sure that every resident in our region can get to where they need to go. And we're here to help our communities, so I'm not just picking on communities. We have made a bold commitment to spend $10 million over the next 10 years to help those communities that don't have ADA transition plans create transition plans and get there. We've been working closely with the Illinois Department of Transportation to fund this initiative, and again, I've been hiring staff who are expert in these fields to be able to help our communities work in partnership towards advancing these goals and making sure that we're in compliance as a region. So again, these are a number of things that Cmap does. We are here to help communities get the data that they need to make better decisions, to help them get the best resources, and then really help support them through implementation. And we're ready to do more of this for our communities with the support of this infrastructure bill that the funding has just started coming from. We will continue to convene and prioritize and build consensus around many new opportunities because we truly believe that our region limits its own potential when we leave too many people and places behind. So, in closing, I want to ask that you reflect on these words by Jeff Speck, a city planner and urban designer, who said, "The pedestrian is an extremely fragile species, the canary in a coal mine of urban livability, and under the right conditions, the creature thrives and multiplies." So I hope that we can keep creating those right conditions so that we can thrive and multiply right here and across our region. So with that, that concludes my formal remarks, but I am excited to hear from you all if you have questions for me.
Bring the mic or I can translate if anyone has a question.
If I may, so the question and a comment. You talked about, and I'm really just talking about our part for the first part. We do have these very nice transportation opportunities for getting downtown, and if you live close enough to the 91 bus down Western Boulevard, you're doing reasonably well to our intra-village transportation is another story. If you live up near North Avenue and want to get to Lake Street, it's almost a mile walk. If you're a senior person or something, it's very hard. There's a few buses that go once an hour. We've tried over the years having shuttles every time they're flat because someone was taking them because you couldn't count on a reliable thing, or you knew it was going to be an hour after you ran into the grocery store before you could get it. So that's one thing that I'm sure in other communities that have only the railroad to get downtown, the situation is not much better.
Yeah.
The other thing is comment on bikes and walking. Bicycling is very nice, but probably about 5 months a year in the Chicago Metropolitan.
5 sounds generous.
Yeah. If you count winter and rain, yeah, I thought that was being generous. And also on the older communities like ours, where the streets are not magnificently wide, it is somewhat risky. Also, there's a failure of will, not only here, but I know in other communities too, but we're encouraging walking. I have a walking partner, we're both in our mid-70s and up. We go walking on the weekend, and maybe 1 out of 100 times will cars stop as we're about to enter a marked crosswalk, and on places like Oak Park Avenue, even the signs
Yep.
are crossing to the churches and school. There is no willingness to spend time and money in trying to get cars to start honoring the walker. It's very hard. Even on the sofa, but I still call the mall on Lake Street, where there's signs about not riding bikes on the sidewalk, and the police just walk by and they never stop it. So we have to have a mentality that accompanies all of this to make sure that there's some degree of enforcement of the best funded and best intended kinds of regulations.
Oh, thanks, and I appreciate both of those comments. And I think one of the things that we are in the moment that we could have the opportunity to seize the moment, right, is to not just think about what it is today our streets look like and not just adding a bike lane to the existing street that we have, but it's thinking about turning it on its head, right? Where are those places where people are wanting to get to inside of the village limits, right? And then thinking about, well, can we push the parking? These things are all very hard, but planners, I think one of the things that I've learned through my I'll say my modest career compared to my peers that I look up to, like Larry Christmas, right, is that it's patience, it's time, you have to set that vision today. The woman who does our safety work, she spent a couple years overseas where in 4th grade, they do a whole unit on being a bicyclist, and she wasn't in the Netherlands, I'm trying to think if she was in Germany or but it'll come to me. But they take the fourth graders out, and part of your class is you learn to ride on the road, and it makes you a better driver at the end of the day. My husband bikes to work. Honestly, I can say it's made me a better driver, because as I think about, do I need to go faster and cut through the lights, or is it more important that I think about whether or not I'm turning and there's a bicyclist coming up here? So I think some of those things are certainly going to need to happen, and before we can get to, I think, what it is you're talking about that's really, long overdue. So I don't have an answer, but just some thoughts.
Hello. Sorry. I wanted to say something to the lovely gentleman over there. I'm from Germany, and the hierarchy is quite the opposite. That the pedestrian is most important, then the cyclist, and then the car. And it's enforced by police. So the cars know if they ride over somebody, they're going to be heavy fines, etc. And that has helped a lot, but it's been decades that it has been this way. So I don't think America will be able to change this quickly. Also, in order to obtain a driver's license, you study for a year, not like 2 weeks, or and a little test. The traffic education for bikes is even a part of elementary school. So in fourth grade, you have the option to make a sort of a bicycle driver's license. And you have to answer theoretical questions and do a little test. So it's been woven into the whole society. But I had a different question. But I just wanted to let you know, Germany has done it that way, and hopefully America might follow. I think one good start would be to have a bit more meat on the driver's license education, and not just have it so short. And my question was, you said you wanted to weave communities together that have been separated by high traffic roads. How is that possible in a sort of safe way? Because the way I see it when it's tried is that it creates very long, dark tunnels that are often occupied by either rubbish or unfortunate human beings that are out of a home. That doesn't really make people feel super safe to walk through. Are there other options that could be employed? That was my question.
That's a great question. And so that brings to mind, so thank you for sharing your experience in Germany and the education. It really is sort of that level of process thinking that I think that we need to bring here. Your question, though, reminds me of a conversation that I was having with a community organization in Austin, the Austin neighborhood, about 290, right? The legislature has been talking about 290. It's been in the news. I know Park cares about the reconstruction of 290. There's been talks about, how do you design that to make it better for both sides of the 290 system, communities that have been bifurcated. But also really making sure that we're bringing CTA into the conversation too. I think one of the opportunities that we have is to think about if you were to redevelop and redesign that CTA Forest Park Blue Line branch, which is in our long-range plan and is slated for funding, but in a longer time horizon, the opportunity is, can we accelerate that right now with the funds that we're getting? Building those two things together, but so my conversation with the communities in Austin is that we'd love to take the transit line to the places that we need to go, but it's scary to walk underneath the viaducts that are there. Or we've taken those CTA stations out historically because they were underperforming and it cost more money to maintain them than it does to keep them open. So it's just it had been easier to close them decades ago. But I think again, it's finding ways to, I think, innovate, to really think about what the community needs in coming up to those areas, right? And if you're able to bring sort of vibrant retail, thinking about sort of Jane Jacobs' eyes on the street, right? If you've got that sort of level of pedestrian activity in those areas, it makes them ultimately safer and has the effect of having some deterrence to having people sort of live and camp out underneath those places and make them places of community pride, whether you do that through art and lighting. So I don't have all the solutions, but I do know that that's a project that we've been talking a lot about too, is that, if that project does get funding through this infrastructure bill to move forward, it's going to be really important that we bring the community partners there so that we aren't just replacing what exists as it is, but thinking about how it can be a better asset to community, to economic opportunity, and that, maybe we do the math differently. We value having a transit station, even if it costs more to maintain, because the people who are doing the jobs do jobs that make our day-to-day life, and people who have higher incomes, people who can get their groceries delivered, it makes our jobs work better, right? Or our lives better. And so how do you, that's another big conversation we've been having, is how do you value things in a different way? How do you value your transit assets? What's the cost per person? And the cost per person means that my hospital is working, right? And that my grocery store is open. So again, no answers, but sort of the big ideas that we've been talking about at Cmap.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Oh, that was fun.
I know, I feel really loud up here too, so it's not just.
That last response was actually a good segue to what I was going to ask, which is, I think there's this tension between making communities better and making your Main Street better and making your transit options better, and then kind of this anti-displacement, this, I'm a relatively converted Oak Park, and we had to pay a good amount to live here and live near the train, and it was one of the priorities for us, and luckily we were able to do it, my family, but a lot of people can't, and so there's that kind of, as you improve, the costs go up. You talked about ETOD, and I was just wondering if you could kind of extrapolate on what some of the methods of making sure that things remain equitable as amenities improve or as connectivity improves.
Yeah, so I mean, I think probably one of the, I don't know if it's the best example, but the top example that people think of, right, is like the New York rent controls, right? It's like making sure that you're thinking about that affordability. But I think in our region, what we've seen over the past decade is that we just haven't built enough housing stock. And also communities have not modernized their housing codes and their zoning codes. And zoning is not a fun thing to talk to a community about because, right, your eyes glaze over, you're like, okay, I don't really know what a B4 is and why does the envelope of a building matter, unless you're an architect. So if you're an architect or a zoning official, my apologies, it's exciting stuff to me. But right, we've got to talk about sort of this form-based sort of design opportunities, and then thinking about sort of that making sure that the places that we want to stay vibrant have a range of opportunities so that you can think about like affordable housing. And when I say affordable, I don't mean, Section 8 housing. I mean affordable to a young family with 2 kids that need to get to work, but maybe they aren't at the height of their career yet. Or a family who maybe they get divorced and you've got a single parent, or a family who has an aging parent who wants to live with them, right? That we're thinking strategically about those types of housing and affordable housing that we're missing. And so, when we look at the wages and the earned incomes that we have across our region, because we have all of that data, I think it's pretty simple for us to do the math and sort of say, okay, this is the size, this is the scale, this is the price of housing that we're missing. And so we want to be able to work with communities to do that. We've worked with Oak Park, Bellwood, Maywood, and one other community that's out here to identify what the housing gaps and needs are. The data is probably a little bit old because that study happened maybe like 8 years ago, but refreshing that data and really understanding where we are in the marketplace. Again, prices of everything have gone up right now, but making sure that communities and community leaders understand the importance of that to attracting people to their communities is I think one of the things that we as planners from the Cmap side need to do a better job of educating publicly elected officials and understanding sort of the nuance.
Thank you for the talk. My name is Doug Pollock. I'm a trustee in Riverside, and I'm also a city planner. And I just want to point out that the chairperson of our planning and zoning commission is here, Jill Mateo. Her husband, former president of Riverside, is in Ben Sells. But I have a couple of questions and comments directly related to a statistic that you showed on the screen. You're expecting, I think it's 25% of people will be working from home on a somewhat regular basis.
Yeah.
Comments on that, couple. I'm finding in my work, I'm doing some consulting work in long-range planning now in the suburbs, and it just feels like we don't know what's next. That the traditional way of doing planning, is that 25% number really going to hold? Are people really going to? I think so. But is one question, what are your comments on that, and specifically how that affects mass transit? Because I know in Riverside, my wife here takes a train downtown one day a week. She works from home the other days. Metro has cut the number of times they stop in Riverside, which is understandable. The demand isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And so that, though, starts a cycle of diminishing the value of the product. So your thoughts on that, but then also I just want to mention that we're also reacting in Riverside to that 25% number. We're not quite ready for accessory dwelling units, but we are looking at zoning amendments that would allow someone to build a home office on the attic space above their garage, for example, or an accessory building. We do expect that those numbers will stay there. So any help we can give Riverside with that, we appreciate it. And I should make a plug for Cmap. They have done some tremendous work in Riverside, the village of Riverside. Your thoughts on all that?
Well, thank you. It was funny because the former Mayor Gorman reached out to me when I had an op-ed at Cranes, and he was on our board, and he was the former mayor of Riverside, and just a delight to work with. And also amazing. When I drove through Riverside, when I moved to Chicago, it's this planned community. It's gorgeous. You read about it, you learn about, the landscape architecture. So it has a special place in my heart. We are really concerned about transit because it does have this sort of downward spiral, right? You reduce service. The way that we pay for transit is that at least 50% of their operations budget has to come from the fare box. So you paying for your fare. And so if people aren't paying fares, right, they have to cut service. And then if they have to cut service and people choose to drive, again, it's this sort of death spiral potentially of transit. I think we have been studying sort of what's going to be sticky, right? Is it going to be 25%? Is it going to be 50%? Are people going to choose to move a little bit farther out? That, I think the biggest barrier to things permanently shifting or people continuing to move further and further out is the lack of availability of affordable housing across our region. We're seeing more people move to the south because of affordable housing, but in terms of people in our region moving around, it's not shifting around that much. For Metro, we've been talking a lot about, is there a model that you look to that's a European model where it's less focused on sort of the daytime, the morning and PM peaks, but that it's providing sort of a holistic service throughout the day on a consistent basis. It's not ideal for, I think, people who are commuting to the office, perhaps, but at least you'd have something reliable. But then you could think about what opportunities there are if you had a consistent train schedule that was more broad, that maybe you're only doing a half day and you could hop on the train and get back into the places. So those are some of the things that we've been thinking about related to transit. We've also been trying to think about from the user experience side. If you ride Metra and you ride CTA and you ride PACE, it's all called Ventra, but they have different fares, right? So we've been trying to talk to our transit operators and nudge them in this idea of a universal fare system, and we can work out on the back end as transportation planners what the splits are, but for the public that convenience would be so great. So I think right now when the challenges are great is the best time to sort of think about redefining that transit system. And I think you're right, it's unknown. Is 25% going to be the number that sticks? Probably not, but I do think in a region like Chicago where we have so many jobs that can't be done from home, the freight and logistics industry is a huge driver of our economy. We should also be thinking about getting people to jobs, thinking about getting people from the south suburbs to O'Hare, where there's lots of freight and logistics jobs, to out west to those rail yards that exist there too, and we just haven't made those connections for people either. So sort of off on some things that I care about too, but again, we're super concerned, and we've been talking with our peers across the country. How do you model what the future is going to look like, and how do you can't take data from 10 years ago and apply it today because we just don't know what's going to stick. So, time to set a big vision for the future.
Thank you very much for the question. I come from France, and I live in Paris. I know great to promote walk for the city and to encourage people to use transit. I know, once again, that cities are very different, but I would like to know your thoughts on this idea of organizing events. I mean, not only thinking about infrastructure, but also about communication and promoting walking and public transport in other ways.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that too about the Car-Free Day. I know that Chicago has taken some of their bigger streets like State Street and Michigan Avenue and closed them several Sundays or Saturdays, which are a little bit slower days for those downtown areas to test out that. I think they've had some big success. I think they plan to bring it back, but I do think, thinking about how you make that happen in downtowns across the region. And one of the things we've been doing through our planning assistance program is bringing together sort of some of our higher capacity communities that are wealthier with some of our lower capacity communities, and so that they can build a peer learning network. So we did a specific call with communities to talk about outdoor dining and implementing sort of these closed streets initiatives as well, because, if you live in a wealthy community or a poor community, I think people still do want those things. So we've been trying to make those connections so that we aren't always the expert in the room, because I'm not a municipality. So thank you for sharing that. I think that that's a great concept, and we certainly want to bring that back to the office.
I think that was the perfect intermediary to me. I was just in Paris for a week, and that's what I wanted to speak a little bit to. But I'm Ryan Benmore, and shout out to my Riverside folks. I am a school board member at Riverside Brookfield High School, civil engineering architecture teacher here at Oak Park. And I also nerd out on all of this stuff and can't get anybody else to care as much as I think it's fun to talk about these things. But going to the idea of Paris being an extremely walkable, different city with regard to what people are going there, certainly as a tourist, going there for a different reason, but how can we promote things like biking? I have a 5 3/4 mile bike from home to work that I don't take very often, as much as I'd like to, but getting people in the culture to actually buy into the idea that it's okay to bike when it's cold. In Paris, you eat outside when it's 45 degrees, as long as it's not too windy. They've got heat lamps, and you have your coffee and baguette, and it's a different mindset all the way around, but changing our culture so that we can have a different mindset about how we choose to live, so that work-life balance thing, and creating, there's so many things that I want to talk about that I'm not going to get into, but the transportation line out of Riverside gives, limited opportunity. It's not the same as what you get from Oak Park. But why is it, and I'm asking, this is probably my biggest question, is why is it that we are stuck only to the spoke system out of downtown Chicago and have not made two wheels? One, in the middle and one a little further out, to make the connection to more longer range travel easier by train.
Yeah, great question. I'll say probably first is money, right? As much as this federal infrastructure bill is going to provide to us in aid to the state and the region, it's not enough to build new stuff like I think you're referring to. But there are other ways that we can do it through bus rapid transit. So actually Pace Bus just got funded to expand and build bus shelters along 294. So that express bus service can happen to employers and employment hubs, and that people could get on at places that were more convenient than farther out into a community at a place that doesn't sort of reach that high capacity freeway faster. So I think we'll see more and more of that moving to the future. We want to make sure that we're utilizing. We already have these highways that connect in different ways, but it's really expensive to own a car if you don't make a lot of money, and it's not just the gas taxes. It's the ownership of that car. But you have to in this region in order to get to jobs. Otherwise, you're transferring to 2 trains. So I think that's one of the the big things too that we really want to make sure that we're thinking about is the nimbleness of the bus. The bus has shown itself to be very resilient throughout COVID, whereas the trains have not, for multiple reasons. They just don't get people to the places that they need to go. Other regions too have these systems that are, these travel transportation management systems too, where they're really helping make sure that it's like, well, if we know people that have this level of education and they're working at this facility, can we do a better job by working with those employers to make the connections between communities that have people that are going to those places? It's happening on an ad hoc basis a little bit here, but I think strategically that's another really great opportunity that's ripe for Cmap to help play a bigger role in making sure that we're connecting the workforce and employment opportunities to the people and communities from where they're living.
Sure. Really quickly, you had talked about the infrastructure bill and the money coming into the state of Illinois. How do communities, how will Cmap be involved in helping communities to compete for that money? You just said it's not going to be enough, but how will Cmap be involved in that?
Yeah, so there are a little over 20 competitive programs that'll be rolling out over this next year. And we anticipate that these competitive programs will happen almost annually over the next 5 years. One of the things that we want to do is we have been taking a look at sort of as we can get a sense for what types of projects they're looking at and how much funding will be available to communities, and then trying to figure out through our planning processes, through our connections with communities who might have projects that are ready to go and build that pipeline. So we want to sort of be creating that list of projects across the region that are ripe for the project opportunities and match those. So we've done some work grant writing for a number of communities. We were able to help secure the Illinois International Port District, getting $25 million to upgrade their facilities. Sauk Village and Calumet Park, we've written like $3.5 million worth of grant proposals for them to get infrastructure from Cook County and whatnot. So that's really what we plan to do, is just sort of make sure that we're being that matchmaker for folks, and if they don't have grant writers on staff, we've been doing a lot of that work for communities as well.
Any other questions for Erin? Erin, thank you.
Well, thank you. And if I had known that I had all of these folks that were volunteering for the communities, let me just say thank you for the time and effort that you spend with your communities, because it really does make a difference in people's lives. So, and for working with young people too. Thank you.